Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for the Sunday Satsang at Raman Kendra Delhi. I would now request Narayananji at the shrine at Raman Kendra Delhi to initiate the puja. Narayananji.
ओम अच्युताय नमः, ओम अनंताय नमः, ओम गोविंदाय नमः। शुक्लांबरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्याये सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। अयमूर्तः समूसर्दोऽस्मि विधिमोन्दो मान्दो नो कृणन्दो। अयमूर्तः समूसर्दोऽस्तु तदेव लग्नं सदीनं तदेव ताराबलं चन्द्रबलं तदेव विद्याबलं दैवबलं तदेव लक्ष्मीपदे ते तेङ्गरीगं स्मरामि। ओम भो ओम भुव ओम सुव ओम मह ओम जन ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। ओम आप ज्योतिषा अमृतं ब्रह्मपुरोस्सरम् अमोपात समस्त दुर्द शात्परा परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम करिष्यमाणस्य कर्मणः निर्विघ्नेन प्रसादं आदौ विघ्नेश्वर पूजां करिष्ये। पृथ्व्या मेरुटुडसी सुगलं चंद्रकुर्मो देवता पृथ्वी दिया त्रिदा लोकादेवितं विष्णुना त्रिदा त्वं स तारे मां देवी पवित्रं गुरुशासनम् आगमार्थं तु देवानां कमनार्थं तु रक्षासां खण्डारवं करां यादव देवदवानलाञ्जनम् अमोपात समस्त दुर्ग शात्वाराशि परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम निर्बंध सिद्ध्यर्थम आदौ विघ्नेश्वर पूजां करिष्ये। गणानां त्वा गणपतिगुं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रुतमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पते आनुशृण्वन्नुसीदसादनम् अस्मिन् हरिद्राबिम्बे महागणपतिं ध्यायामि महागणपतिम् आवाहयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः आसनं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः अर्घ्यं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः पाद्यं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः आसमनीयं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः औपचारिकस्नानं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः स्नानानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः वस्त्रदातं अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः यज्ञोपवीतार्थम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः गन्धां धारयामि समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः गन्धोपरि अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः मर्मणार्थम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः हरिद्रा कुंकुमं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः पुष्पै पूजयामि। ओम सुमुखाय नमः। ओम एकदंताय नमः। ओम कपिलाय नमः। ओम गजकर्णकाय नमः। ओम लंबोदराय नमः। ओम विगणाय नमः। ओम विघ्नराजाय नमः। ओम विनायकाय नमः। ओम धूमकेतवे नमः। ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः। ओम बालचंद्राय नमः। ओम गजाननाय नमः। ओम वक्रतुंडाय नमः। ओम शूर्पकर्णाय नमः। ओम हेरंबाय नमः। ओम स्कंदपूर्जवाय नमः। ओम सिद्धविनायकरे नमः। ओम शंकरमोक्षविनायकरे नमः। ओम आतुपुरप्रे विनायकरे नमः। विनायकरे नमः। ओम महागणपतिये नमः। नानाविध परमणपत्र पुष्पाणि समर्पयामि। धूपार्थं समर्पयामि। दीपार्थं समर्पयामि। अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। देवसवित प्रसव सत्यम दौर्जन्य प्रसंजामि अमृतस्तु अमृत स्वाहा। ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा। ओम अपानाय स्वाहा। ओम व्यानाय स्वाहा। ओम उदानाय स्वाहा। ओम समानाय स्वाहा। ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। कोडगंड इनुप्पुपन्नं नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि। मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि। अमृतोपचार सूत्राभूषं समर्पयामि। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। गणानां त्वा गणपतिं अवावे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवणं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मस्पदमानुष्ठुं महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। नीराजनं समर्पयामि। नीराजनानन्तरम् आस्मनीयं समर्पयामि। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गणपति प्रसादं शिरसा प्रणमामि। ओम भो ओम भुव ओम स्व ओम मह ओम जन ओम तव ओम सत्यम दत्त सर्वणीयम भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। ओम ज्योतिर्समृद्धं ममोपात समस्त दुर्द शैत्वारा श्री परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम शुभे शोभने मुहूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण द्वितीय परार्थे श्री वेदे वराह कल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वंतरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे वादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरो दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगाप्ते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यावावृके प्रभवादिनां षष्ठीया संवत्सराणां मध्ये पिलवनाम संवत्सरे उत्तरायणे शिशिर ऋतु कुंभमासे शुक्लपक्षे एकादशी तिथियां शुभतिथौ भानुवासर युक्तायां पुनर्वस नक्षत्र युक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभ योग शुभ कर्ण एवं गुण विशेषिण विशिष्टायां अस्यां चतुर्थ्यां एकादशी तिथियां शुभतिथौ मम जन्म पाप जन्म प्रति मध्ये संभावदानं सर्वेषां पावनं सत्य अवलोकनार्थं अविनाश स्वामी शर्मणः जिंदाल गोत्रम कौशल्या जानवी जिंदाल गोत्रम अस्माहं सहकुटुम्बानां क्षेमसद्धर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्याणाम् अभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्त मंगलाभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्त दुर्दोपशान्त्यर्थं रमण महर्षि प्रसादेन ज्ञानवैराग्यसिद्ध्यर्थं श्री रमण महर्षि पूजां करिष्ये तदंगम कलश पूजां स करिष्ये। विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि शोभनाते क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च। कलशस्य मुखे विष्णुखण्डे रुद्रसमाश्रित मूले तत्र सिद्धिते ब्रह्मा मध्ये मातृगणा समृद्धा कुशौ तुलसागरा सर्वे सप्तविधा वसुंधरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदो अथर्वण गंगे यमुने सैव गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंधु कावेरी जलेस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु अंगैश्च सहिता सर्वे कलशाम्बुसमाश्रिता आयान्तु देवपूजार्थं दुर्दशकारगा। कंबूरा सागरोत्पन्नो विष्णुना विष्णु करे देवे से भूजे भजे आंजनेय नमोस्तुते देवो देवालय प्रोक्तो जीव देव स्नानन अंजार निर्माल्यम स्वयं भवने पूजयेत ओम सकल गुणात्म शक्तियुक्ता योग पीडात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदि गुरुमाय नमः आनंदाय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवताभ्यो नमः दश दिग्बालेभ्यो नमः गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वर गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः ओम अस्य श्री प्राणप्रतिष्ठामन्तस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वर ऋषिकेश सामधर्वाणी संतांसी सकल जगत स्थिति सम्मार्गाणी प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति क्रोम कीलकम प्राणप्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिं दर्जनीभ्यां नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनाभिभ्यां नमः हरिं अनिष्टिकाभ्यां नमः क्रोम कर्णकुष्ठाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा क्रोम शिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वसट क्रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व सर्व दिग्बंध ध्यानम रड्डांबोधिस्थ बोधोलस तरणसोडकराब्चे पासम गोदंडम इक्षुत्व मणिगुण पंचबाणात् विप्राण सुखवालम त्रिलेन सिद्धापि नवसोरोढ्या देवी बालार्कवर्णा बहुसुग्री प्राणशक्ति परान ओम आम हरिं क्रोम क्रोम हरिं माम हम यम रम लम वम सब सम्म अंश स्वम स्वम अंश अस्यामूर्तौ जीवदृष्टिदो अस्यामूर्तौ सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ्मनस्वस्वस्वत्र दिव्या प्राणवाक् पाणिपाद पायुगुस्तानि याकस्ति स्वस्ति सुखं शिरं दृष्टन्तु स्वाहा ओम अस्य श्री प्राणप्रतिष्ठामन्तस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वर ऋषिकेश सामधर्वाणी संतांसी सकल जगत स्थिति सम्मार्गारणी प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति क्रोम तिलकम प्राणप्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिं तर्जनीभ्यां नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनाभिभ्यां नमः हरिं अनिष्टिकाभ्यां नमः क्रोम कर्णकुष्ठाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा क्रोम सिंहाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वसट क्रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व दिग्बंध असुनिदे पुनर्स्माक्ष सक्ष पुनः प्राणमे नोदय भोगम जोग पश्यमि सूर्य मुच्चरन मनमुदे मलयान स्वस्ति आवायुधो भव सद्दाभिधो भव सन्निधो भव सन्निधो भव अवगुंडिधो भव सुब्रधो भव सुब्रसन्नो भव सुमुगो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामिन् सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानकं तावद्ध्वं प्रतिभावेन बिम्बेऽस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः श्री कुबेराय नमः चतुर्नदि मंत्रंजन पौल सुभद्रपः लक्ष्मी प्रद सीमानगद प्रिय ईश्वरा भगवान श्रवणो स्तोत्र श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेव महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः अपार सच्चि सुगुवारी राशौर्य शौर्मी मात्रं भुवनं समस्तं गुणायुधं तं रमणं गभीरं चिन्ताविनीनं हृदि चिन्तयामि ओम महोसेन महोंसेन जाताय नमः ओम श्री रमणाय नमः ओम गुरवे नमः ओम अखंड संविदागराय नमः ओम महुजसे नमः ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः ओम जगत्तिदावताराय नमः ओम श्री भूमिनादास्तलोतिदाय नमः ओम पराशर कुलोतंसाय नमः ओम सुंदरातनवफलाय नमः ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः ओम सयायांबा सयायवते नमः ओम शोणासुर मौलिन मानसाय नमः ओम स्वर्णस्तकाय नमः ओम श्रीमद्वादशांत महास्थले रक्त विद्योदयाय नमः ओम महाशक्ति निवादेन प्रवृत्ताय नमः ओम परमार्थविदे नमः ओम दिव्यराय नमः ओम पितृप्रदानवेशिने नमः ओम इंदुमौलिना पितृपदे नमः ओम पितरादेष्ट सोणशैलं प्राप्ताय नमः ओम तपोमयाय नमः ओम उदासीनाय नमः ओम महायोगिने नमः ओम महोत्साहाय नमः ओम कुशाग्रदिये नमः ओम शांतसंकल्प संभ्रमाय नमः ओम सुसुंदृसे नमः ओम सवित्रे नमः ओम स्थिराय नमः ओम तपस्विद सर्वंगाय नमः ओम पुल्लांबूज विलोचनाय नमः ओम चंद्रिकासिदास श्री मंडिदानन मंडलाय नमः ओम सूदवाट्यां समासीनाय नमः ओम सूर्यनिदाखिल विप्रमाय नमः। ओम वेद वेदांत तत्वज्ञाय नमः। ओम चिन्मुत्रणे नमः। ओम त्रिगुणाधिकाय नमः। ओम विरूपाक्ष गुहावासाय नमः। ओम विराजस सलाकृतिये नमः। ओम उत्तिक्तनयनाय नमः। ओम पूर्णाय नमः। ओम रसिदास तांडवाय नमः। ओम गंभीराय नमः। ओम परमाचार्याय नमः। ओम सुब्रसन्याय नमः। ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः। ओम दक्षिणासीनिवाय नमः। ओम धीराय नमः। ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः। ओम स्वराजे नमः। ओम महर्षिये नमः। ओम भगवते नमः। ओम ईट्याय नमः। ओम भूमविद्या विशारदाय नमः। ओम विमलाय नमः। ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः। ओम आप्ताय नमः। ओम ऋजुमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः। ओम समत्रुसे नमः। ओम सत्यत्रुसे नमः। ओम सत्याय नमः। ओम प्रशांताय नमः। ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः। ओम सुकुमाराय नमः। ओम सदानंदाय नमः। ओम मृदुवासिने नमः। ओम दयार्णवाय नमः। ओम श्री सोणासुर युरुद्भूत स्कंदाश्रम निकेतनाय नमः। ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टरे नमः। ओम सद्भक्त वृंद परिवृदाय नमः। ओम गणेश मुनि प्लिंगेन सेवितां कृष्णोरुगाय नमः। ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि ग्रंथ संचिन्न संशयाय नमः। ओम वर्णाश्रम मदादीदाय नमः। ओम रसक्नाय नमः। ओम सौम्याय नमः। ओम आत्मवदे नमः। ओम सर्वावनिमस्तानां मारात्याय नमः। ओम सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः। ओम आत्मारामाय नमः। ओम महाभागाय नमः। ओम मातृमुक्ति विदायकाय नमः। ओम विनदाय नमः। ओम विनुदाय नमः। ओम विप्राय नमः। ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ओम भावगोज्वलाय नमः। ओम दर्शनादिक सम्मारणे नमः। ओम मौलेन स्वात्मबोधकाय नमः। ओम मिर्चान्दिकरसानित्याय नमः। ओम प्रणाद्बंध मोचकाय नमः। ओम अंधस्मिर चंडांसवे नमः। ओम संसार तारकाय नमः। ओम सोणादिष्टरे नमः। ओम आर्तविद्या प्रकाशकाय नमः। ओम अविच्युत निज प्रज्ञाय नमः। ओम नैसर्गिक महातपसे नमः। ओम कमंडलुधराय नमः। ओम सुब्रगौरिनवसनाय नमः। ओम गुहाय नमः। ओम दंडवाणी नमः। ओम कृपापूर्णाय नमः। ओम पवरोगपिशक्पराय नमः। ओम स्कंदाय नमः। ओम देवदमाय नमः। ओम अमर्त्याय नमः। ओम सेनानीय नमः। ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कार्तिकाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री मुरुगाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री वल्ली दैवाने नमः। नमो भगवते श्री सुब्रमण्याय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री स्वामीनाथने नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री नटराजने नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री भैरवरे नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री नंदीभैसराय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री शिवपार्वतीये नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय 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 नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। Now let us all chant Upadesa Saram. कस्तूराज्ञया प्रापदे बलं कर्मगिम्बरं कर्मदज्जडं गृहतिमहददौ पदनकारणं फलमशाश्वतं गदनिरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितं नेचया कृतं सिद्धसोदकं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवाङ्मन कार्यमुद्दमं भूजनं जव चिन्तनं क्रमात् जगतैसदी युग्धसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृत् देवपूजनं उद्दमस्तव दुज्जमन्दद सिद्धजं जव ज्ञानमुद्दमम् आज्यधारया स्रोतसासमं सरलचिन्तनं विरलदबरं वेदभावनां सौवमित्यसौ भावनाभिधा भावनीमदा भावशून्य भावसुस्तुति भावना बला भक्तिरुद्धमा इरुस्तले मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्तियोग बोधाच निश्चितम् वायुरोदना दीयते मन जालभक्षिव योधसाधनं सिद्धवायव सित्क्रियायुधा सागयोर्द्वयी शक्तिमूलगा लयविनाशने उभयरोदने लयकदं पुनर्भवति नो मृदं प्राणबन्धना लीनमानसम् एकचिन्तना नासमेत्यद नष्टमानसो विष्टयोगिन कृत्यमस्ति किं स्वस्तिदं यद दृश्यवारिदं सिद्धमात्मन शित्वदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं दुगिं मार्गणे हृदे नैव मानसं मार्गार्जवात् वृद्धयस्त्वहं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मन अहमयं कुतो भवति चिनवदत् ऐपदत्यहं निजविसारणम् अहमिनाशवात् अहमहं दया स्फुरधीरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अभिक्यमन्वहम् अहमिलीनके अप्यल्यसत्तया विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणदीदम नामसेकस दज्जडं सस सत्वभासिका चित्ववेदरा श्रद्धया चित् चित्तयायहम् ईसजीवयो वेषदीबिदा सस्वभावदो वस्तु केवलं वेषहानद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईसदर्शनं स्वात्मरूपत आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्द्वया आत्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनचि ज्ञानमस्ति किं ज्ञातुमन्तरं किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भव अपूर्णसित्सुखं बन्धमुक्त्यदी कम्बरं सुखं विन्दधीयये वस्तुदैविक अहमभेदकं निजविभानकं महति तं तपो रमणवाग्यं महति तं तपो रमणवाग्यं महति तं तपो रमणवाग्यम्.
Namo Ramana. Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to the Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. As our schedule since January, we will be addressed by Mr. James, who shall be speaking to us on each verse of Upadesa Saram. A brief background about Upadesa Saram to some of the new devotees. As per the legend, there was a group of wayward rishis of Daruka forest who were practicing special rites for attaining powers that they so desired. By the same means, they hoped to attain final liberation. However, they were mistaken, for action can only result in action. Rituals can produce powers, but not peace of liberation. Rishis then realized they were up against one more powerful than themselves and bowed down to him for instruction. Their egos deflated by Shiva, and perceiving the error of their approach, They humbly sought spiritual instruction from Shiva. Shiva graciously bestowed the instruction, and it is these teachings that Muruganar requested Sri Bhagwan to reveal in verse form. We will now have Mr. Michael James address us on the further verses from Upadesa Saram. A brief background: he has started his spiritual journey at Tiruvannamalai during his visit to India in 1976, where he stayed for over 20 years and had a long friendship and association with Sri Sadhu Om. He is now based in London, where he regularly discusses Bhagwan's teachings with fellow devotees via email and Zoom, focusing primarily on explaining his original Tamil writings. Mr. James, I will just put you on the spotlight, sir, and please go ahead.
And can you give me permission to record?
Oh, yes. Just give me a minute. Here it is.
Okay, thank you. So shall I begin?
Yes, sir.
Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verses 8, 9, and 10 of Upadesa Saram. Last time I spoke about verses 3 to 8. The reason I'm going to talk about 8, which I talked about last time, is that this verse 8 is an important link between two series of verses. That is the verses I talked about last time, verses 3 to 8. What the main gist of it is in verse 3, Bhagavan, in verse 2, Bhagavan had said, but karma obstructs liberation. In verse 2, sorry, that was verse 2. In verse 3, however, he said, if action is done without desire and offered to God, that means done for the love of God rather than for the love of anything we can gain from the action, that will purify the mind, and that will, well, in the Tamil he says it will show the way to liberation. In the Sanskrit version, he says it is mukti sadhakam, it's a means to liberation, but he doesn't mean it's a direct means, it's an indirect means, because only when the mind is purified will it have the clarity to understand what the actual path to liberation is. So the aim of all karmas, all nishkarmiya karmas, that is purification of mind. The impurities in the mind are the Vishaya vasanas, the inclination to go outwards towards Vishayas, towards anything other than ourselves. So, but by devotion to, by what Bhagavan means by nishkarmiya karma, done for the love of God, are the practices of puja, japa, and dhyana. Puja is action, is worship of God by bodily action. Japa is worship of God by speech, and dhyana is worship of God by mind. So these devotional practices, this is what Bhagavan calls nishkarmiya karma, done for the love of God, or offered to God. So Bhagavan is not treating karma yoga as a path separate from bhakti. That is the preliminary stages of bhakti, where we are still expressing our love for God through actions of mind, speech, and body. That is nishkarmiya karma. So to try and do nishkarmiya karma outside the context of bhakti is not practical, because whatever we do for some reason. There has to be some motive to do anything. Normally, we are motivated by our desires, by our Vishaya vasanas. But if instead of being motivated by any desire, we are motivated by just by love of God, whatever we do for the love of God, that is nishkarmiya karma. So the appropriate actions to do for the love of God are puja, japa, and dhyana. And puja, of course, as he said in the fifth verse, where he talks about puja, puja is worship of any of the 8 forms of God. The 8 forms of God include the 5 elements, so it includes all material things that are made out of the material elements, and all mental things which are made out of the subtle forms of the elements, the tanmatras. So all the everything composed of the 5 elements. In other words, the whole of Prakriti, right? And the sun, moon, and jiva. So whatever we do, considering this world to be a form of God, and considering the jivas in this world to be forms of God, whatever worshipful actions we do for the love of God, not for gaining anything, that is good puja. So nishkarmiya karma can include doing service, I mean, for example, helping poor people, or taking care of the environment, or all these things. If you do it in a spirit of worship of God, then it is good worship of God. That is what Bhagavan says there. So that is the usual understanding of nishkarmiya karma, but it's doing social service, doing service. But that's only one aspect of it. If you do any service divorced from devotion to God, then it is not nishkarmiya karma. So in verses 3 to 7, but first Bhagavan says nishkarmiya karma will purify the mind. Then he says there are 3 kinds of nishkarmiya karma we can do: actions of body, speech, and mind, namely puja, japa, and dhyana. And then he deals with each of those in verses 5, 6, and 7. So from verses 3 to 7, he is talking about karma, doing, action. Why 8 is important is 8 is the link between sadhana as doing and sadhana as just being. The real sadhana, the sadhana that will lead to liberation, directly to liberation, is just being. Because what is liberation? Liberation is knowing our real nature. What is the nature of our real nature? It is just being. That is, it's our own being we are seeking to know, and we can know our being only by being our being, as Bhagavan clarifies later in verse 26. Knowing ourselves is being ourselves. So the verse 8 is a very, very important verse, because it shows how we switch over from doing to being. So having put it in context, I will now go through the meaning of verse 8 again. What Bhagavan says in this Sanskrit version is Veda Bhavanat Sohamitya So Bhavana Pita Pavani Mata. That means Veda Bhavanat is separating meditation. In other words, meditation where we consider God to be something separate from ourselves. In Tamil, he says Anya Bhava. Anya means other. So when we take God to be other than ourselves, there's a separation between ourselves and God. I am different, God is different. That is the Veda Bhavana. So rather than meditation, when we meditate on God as something different from ourselves, non-separating meditation, that's Bhavana Abhita, and he clarifies what he means by that Bhavana Abhita. That is as he is I, that is sohamitya so. Or that is he is I, that is the non-separated meditation in which he is I is the meaning. Bhavani Mata is considered purifying. In the Tamil version, the terms he uses are Anya Bhava and Ananya Bhava. Anya Bhava means meditating on what is other. That's meditating, considering God to be something other or different from ourselves. And Ananya Bhava is meditating on what is not other or different to ourselves. What is not other than ourselves is only ourselves. So Ananya Bhava, what it implies is meditating on ourself alone, with the understanding that he is I. And in the Sanskrit, he says pavani mata, it's considered purifying. In Tamil, he says anatinam uttamam, it is the best among all. What does he mean by the best among all? That is in the context. These verses are talking about means of purifying the mind. And Bhagavan is having talked about saying that nishkarmiya karma done for the love of God will purify the mind in verse 3. In verse 4, he says that we can do nishkarmiya karma by mind, speech, and body, that is puja, japa, and dhyana, and each is better than the preceding one. That is more effective at purifying the mind than puja is japa. More effective than japa is dhyana, because because puja is an action done by the body, which is relatively gross. Japa is an action done by speech, which is more subtle. And dhyana is action done by mind, which is still more subtle. So that puja is more, dhyana is more effective than japa, and japa is more effective than puja. So he's classifying it. So when he says in verse 8, but this is the best among all, and what he means is this is the most effective means to purify the mind. It is also the best for, that's one meaning. Another meaning we can say it's the best form of meditation. Oh, sorry, the best form of devotion, because it's about devotion to God. Rather than meditating on God as something other than ourselves, meditating on him as I alone, that is the best. That's the best way of expressing our love for God, because God is most intimately present in our heart as I. Soham, he is I. It also we can also take it to mean this is the best among all types of spiritual practice. But he goes on then in the next series of verses, from verses 11 to 15, he's talking about the path of yoga. So what he says about this Ananya Baba being the best among all, it applies to yoga also. This is better than yoga. So this is the highest of all sadhanas. And as I say, what he means by Ananya Baba in Tamil or Bhavana Apita in Sanskrit is attending to nothing other than ourselves. Not attending to anything that is different or separate from ourselves. So one important thing to understand here is Bhagavan is not talking about Soham Bhavana. Generally, when people see this verse, they see the word Soham and they see the word Bhavana and they say, oh, Bhagavan is here talking about Soham Bhavana. Soham Bhavana is the meditation in which you meditate on the thought, he is I. That is not what Bhagavan means here. Why? Because the thought he is I is not ourself. It's something other than ourself. It's anya. It's something separate from ourselves. So meditating on the thought he is I is not ananya bhava. It's not bhavana apita. The reason the words he is I are here is, why do we meditate on I alone? Because we understand that he is I. When we understand that God is I, we truly understand the implication of saying Soham or Tattvamasi or Aham Brahmasmi. If we understand the meaning of these Mahavakyas, the implication of these Mahavakyas, they mean we need not meditate on God as anything other than ourselves. If God is I, then what should we meditate on? We should meditate on I alone. Meditating on I alone, meditating on nothing other than I is Ananya Bhava or Bhavana Apita. So this is a very important, but a very subtle, but very important point to understand here. In fact, Soham Bhavana is, Soham Bhavana, as it is generally understood, in other words, meditating on the thought he is I, is a result of a failure to understand the practical implication of the Mahavakyas. Yes, it is true he is I, but merely thinking he is I doesn't enable us to experience ourselves as I. In order, as he, to experience him as I. In order to experience him as I, we need to attend only to I, and thereby sink deep into our heart and merge back in him, because he is that ultimate reality that is ever shining in our heart as I. Because this is such an important point to understand, but this is not Soham Bhavana, I'm just going to go through a few verses of Uludunaptu, because these enable us to understand what is Bhagavan's attitude towards Soham Bhavana. There are 4 verses in Uludunaptu where Bhagavan touches upon this Mahavakya, Tattvamasi, or you are that, which is the implication of which is he is I. In verse 27, Bhagavan says, Nanudiyada ullanilai, namaduvai ullanilai. That means the state in which we exist without rising as I. In other words, the state of just being without rising as I is the state in which we exist as that. So in order, that is what is the practical implication of the Mahavakya Tattvamasi. If we are that, then how to be that? We have to just be as we actually are. Being as we actually are means not rising as ego. When we rise as ego, we seem to be, I am this person, I am Michael, or I am whoever. That is a false awareness of ourselves. I am is not Michael, or not any person, or not anybody. I am is I am alone, nothing other than I am. That's why Bhagavan often said, nan, nan, aham, aham, I am I. But the state in which we do not rise as ego, the state in which of just being, in which we do not rise as ego, is the state in which we are that. So that is the practical implication of the Mahavakya Tattvamasi, or any of the Mahavakyas, because they all imply the same thing. We are Brahman, that I am Aham Brahmasmi. How to experience ourselves as Brahman? Just to be as I am. By being as I am, without rising as I am this person, or I am this body, is a state in which we are existing as that, or being as that. And then he goes on to say, Nan udikum tanam ade nadamal, without investigating the place where I rises, Nan udiya tan irape savadu evan. How to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. I does not rise means ego does not rise. That is the pure I never rises. It just remains as it is. It is just a being I. But ego is the rising I. Because ego appears and disappears. So it rises and it subsides. So when he talks about rising as I, he's talking about the rising as ego. So what this means is, without investigating the place where I rises, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. This is a very, very important sentence, because though this is a rhetorical question, the implication is very clear. When Bhagavan asks the question, how to reach the annihilation of oneself without investigating the place where I rises, the clear implication is we cannot reach the annihilation of ourselves. We cannot bring about manonasa without investigating the place where I rises. So what is the place where I rises? What does Bhagavan mean by the place where I rises? Well, obviously it's not a place in time or space. It's not a physical space, a place, or even a mental place, because but as he says in verse 26 of Ulunaptu, the previous verse, when ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. When ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what it is, that is what investigating what ego is giving up everything. So since everything comes into existence, only when ego comes into existence, ego cannot rise from anything that comes into existence, that is. So when he says everything there, he means all phenomena, everything that appears and disappears, appears only when ego appears. Why? Because it appears only in the view of ego. So the place where I rises cannot be found outside ourselves. It can only be found within ourselves. We ourselves are the place where I rises. In sleep, we remain. In sleep, what are we aware of in sleep? In sleep, we are aware of nothing other than our own being. We're aware I am. We're not even aware I am sleeping. We are just aware of our own existence, our mere existence. So that fundamental awareness I am, but exists in sleep and in waking and dream, because it's the basis of everything. That is the ground. So that is the place from which I rises. So that fundamental awareness I am, which even now is shining and which was shining equally well in sleep, that is the place where I rises. So he's using word place here in a metaphorical sense. As he does again in, we'll see later on today in verse 10, he talks about the place, heart. In Sanskrit, he says, Hritstale, in the heart place. In Tamil, he says, Udita idatil, in the place of rising, the place from which we have risen. So that place from which we have risen is only I am. So he's using place here in a metaphorical sense. So what he says here, without investigating the place where I rises, which means without investigating this fundamental awareness I am, how can we attain the annihilation of ourselves, the state in which I never rises? That is, the I that rises, namely ego, is the false awareness, I am this body. So it's a false awareness of ourself. It's an awareness of ourself as something other than what we actually are. So how to bring about the destruction, the annihilation of this false awareness, I am this body, only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are. And how to be aware of ourselves as we actually are? Obviously, we need to investigate ourselves. We need to attend to ourselves to see what we actually are. So this sentence is a very, very important sentence. Bhagavan is, the implication of this sentence is without investigating that fundamental awareness I am, from which we have risen as ego, we cannot bring about the annihilation of ego. That is the clear implication. And then he goes on to say, Sarama, without reaching, that means without attaining the annihilation of ourself, and mananasa, tan aduam, tan nilayil, nipadu evan. Without reaching that, how to stand in the state of oneself, or in one's own state. That means in our natural state, in our real state, in which oneself is that. Tanaduam, in which oneself is that. So in order, the implication of the Mahavakya, Tattvamasi or Soham, is that since he is I, in order to be as him, we need to be as we actually are, be what I actually is. He is not the rising I, ego, he's the being I. So we have to be as the being I. Of course, there are not two I's. When that being I is mixed with adjuncts, it seems to be the rising I. So the I is always only one, but just like the rope is always a rope. Even when it's seen as a snake, it's still only a rope. Likewise, even when we rise as ego, we are still only that being I. It's not that there are two I's, but that being I mixed with adjuncts seems to become this rising I called ego. And so in order to be as the being I, which is he or Brahman or that, we need to abide in our own state. And to abide in our own state, we need to bring about, we need to cease rising as I, not just temporarily, permanently. Every night when we fall asleep, we cease rising as I, but only briefly. That is manolaya, whereas our aim is manonasa. One friend had asked a question about that. I will deal with that question about the difference between manolaya and manonasa later. So this is the first verse in Ulludunapti in which Bhagavan touches upon the correct implication of the Mahavakya Tattvamasi, or other similar sayings like Soham or Shivoham. I am, he is I, or Shiva is I. They all have the same implication. But the practical implication is that we need to investigate I to find out who am I. In verse 29, he also touches upon this very slightly. He defines what is vichara, but he refers to vichara here as jnana neri, the path of jnana. What he says in the first sentence is, nan endru vayal nabiladu, not saying I by mouth. Ul al manatal, by the inward sinking mind, nan endru engu undum endru nadale jnana neriyam, investigating with with or by an inward sinking mind, where one rises as I, alone is the path of knowledge, alone is jnana marga. Jnana marga means that the path of Atma Vichara. So in order to know what we actually are, we need to investigate ourselves with an inward sinking mind. Why does he say ullal manatal, by an inward sinking mind? Mind here is used in the sense of attention. When our attention turns back within to face ourself alone, to attend to I am alone, it thereby subsides. That is, the mind rises and goes outwards by attending to things other than itself. By attending to itself, it will subside and merge back in its source. So by being keenly self-attentive, the mind will sink within. That is the implication here. And that alone is the path of knowledge. This alone is jnana yoga, jnana marga. And then he goes on to say, Andri, Andrew idu, nam adu, endru unnal, tuneyam, adu vicharam ama. What that means is, instead, that is, instead of investigating inwardly, instead of investigating where I rises, in other words, instead of investigating that fundamental awareness I am, with the mind thereby sinking within, instead of doing so, thinking, not this, I am that, is an aid. What he means by not this, I am that, is I am not this body, I am that Brahman. So merely thinking I am not this, I am that, that is merely a thought. So it may be an aid. He says, thinking thus is an aid. Tune means an aid. A tune can also mean a guide. So what guidance should we get from this thought, I am he, or I am Brahman? It should prompt us to turn back to investigate ourselves to see who am I. So merely thinking that, it is an aid, that we need to have that conviction, but we are not this body, but what we actually are is only Brahman. But merely thinking I am not this body, I am Brahman, it's not going to make us Brahman. We can experience, we are always Brahman, so we cannot become Brahman, but we can experience ourselves as Brahman only by attending to ourselves alone, only by investigating the place where I rise. In other words, investigating the fundamental awareness I am, with the mind thereby sinking within. This is the only way to experience ourselves as that, as he said in verse 27. So merely thinking I am not this body, I am that, is an aid, but is it vichara? The final thing is, adu vichara mama, is it vichara? No, it is not vichara. It's the implication. I mean, whenever rhetorical question is asked, it's just an emphatic way of saying, if you say, when Bhagavan asks, is it vichara? The implication is, no, it cannot be vichara. So this verse 29. Then in verse 32, this is a very, very important verse. Because here, this verse, Bhagavan, that is what is unique about Bhagavan's teachings, is Bhagavan has clarified the whole of Vedanta by his teachings. But the main point he has clarified is what is the practical implication. The Upanishads have been telling us for thousands of years, but you are that. Or the Mahavakyas, they have been there for thousands of years. But what is the practical implication of such Mahavakyas? That is, everyone knows the Mahavakyas are so important, but it's not just that they're not just ideas that we have to meditate upon. What is the practical implication? If I am that, then what should I do about it? Obviously, I should investigate who am I or what am I? That is what Bhagavan is implying in this verse. What he says is, Aduni Endru Amarikal Atidavam. When or as soon as the Vedas proclaim that is you, Aduni, Tatvamasi, Tane Edu Endru Tan Tendu Iradu. Instead of oneself being, knowing oneself as what? In other words, instead of investigating what am I, and thereby being as we actually are, adunan, idu andru, endru ennal, uranin meinal. That means thinking, I am that, not this, is due to, we can say absence of strength, but actually uran in May means non-existence. So the complete absence of strength. If we have the requisite strength when we hear the words Tattvamasi, our immediate response should be to turn our attention back to ourselves, not merely to think, I am that, not this. Not this means not this body. What is the strength that Bhagavan means? Firstly, it is the strength of clarity of understanding. That is, when the Vedas say, you are that, if we continue just meditating on the Mahavakyas, and there are learned scholars who will give lectures for hours on end about the meaning of Mahavakyas, such as Tattvamasi. They will first talk for hours about Tat, then they'll talk about Tvam, then they'll talk about Asi. They'll analyze these words threadbare. Then they will say, first you need to investigate what is Tat, then you need to investigate what is Tvam, then you need to investigate what is Asi. That is completely missing the point. The point of the Mahavakya is to say, that is you. In other words, there is no that other than you. So if you want to know Brahman, you have to know you. That is the implication. And how to know you? You have to investigate, what am I? So that is Bhagavan is here highlighting what is the practical implication. If instead of investigating, what am I, and thereby knowing and being what we actually are, if we go on thinking, I am that Brahman, I am not this body, this is due to a complete absence of strength of intellect, that is strength of understanding. That is, but this Vedanta is the path of, it is the path of bhakti, it is also the path of jnana. But the true bhakti and true jnana are inseparable, as Bhagavan has made so clear. So in order to love, what is real, we first need to know what is real. We need to understand what is real. So on the path of jnana, a correct understanding is all important. Of course, merely understanding is not sufficient. We understand why we need to understand, because only when we understand the practical implication of Vedanta will we be able to put it into practice correctly. If we don't understand the practical implication, then we are missing the whole point. Vedanta is an extremely practical science. If we don't understand the practical implication of what is said, if we take it to be merely a theoretical philosophy, merely a set of ideas to philosophize about, we have missed the point. It is a philosophy, but an extremely practical philosophy. And what is the practice? When you are told you are that, the practice is to investigate who am I. That was to turn our attention. Previously, we were looking for that outside. We were thinking God or Brahman is somewhere outside. We need to turn back within to see who am I. And by seeing who am I, we thereby, mind subsides, as he said in verse 29, the mind will sink within, and thereby we be as we actually are, which we'll come across this more in the next verse of Upadesa Saram that we're about to talk about. But I just want to discuss these verses thoroughly. So why is it thinking I am this, not that? Why is it due to absence of strength? Bhagavan says, Endrum aduve tanai amavadal, because that alone is always seated as oneself. That is, that Brahman is always sitting in our heart, shining as ourself, as I am I. As he says in Hridaya Guhara Madhye, Kevalam Brahma Matram, Hyam Aham iti Sakshat Atma Rupena Bhati. So Brahman is always shining in our heart as our own self, as I am I. So I am I means not I am this or I am that. I am this or I am that. We're thinking about something other than I. The truth is, the true experience of Brahman is not I am Brahman, but I am I. Why? Because Brahman is nothing other than I. When we know ourselves as we actually are, there's nothing other than ourselves for us to know. So we cannot be anything other than I. So when we are told that Brahman is ourself, instead of investigating ourselves, if we go on thinking I am Brahman, it is a complete misunderstanding. So when he says it's Uranin Meinal, it's due to a non-existence of strength. What he means by non-existence of strength is non-existence of clarity of understanding. We don't have the strength even to understand the practical implication of this. We don't have the strength of intellect to understand the practical implication. So we go on saying, I am that, I am that. So Bhagavan is so emphatic. He doesn't deny that thinking I am that is an aid. Why is it an aid? Because we need to, of course, we need to do manana. Thinking I am that is manana. We need to understand. It's not merely repeating I am that like a mantra. We need to think about it deeply. We need to do deep manana in order to be firmly convinced why we are not this body and why we are that. We need to do manana in order to understand it clearly. Having understood it clearly, we then need to put it into practice by investigating what am I. And then the last verse, the fourth verse in Uludunapti, in which he talks about, in which he touches upon this subject, is verse 36. What he says in verse 36 is, Nam udal endru enin. If we think that we are the body, or that we are a body, allam nan adu endru ennum adu adu nam aduva nipaduku nal tuneyam. What that means is, if we think that we are a body, thinking, no, we are that, will just be a good aid for us to stand as that. That is, our aim is to be that. In order to be that, we need to investigate ourselves. In order to investigate ourselves, we first need to understand what we actually are. We are not this body. We are that. We are that pure awareness, that prajnanam Brahman. Brahman is that prajnana, that fundamental awareness I am. So we need to understand that we are that fundamental awareness I am. So thinking that is doing manana is a good aid, but and it is necessary. So long as we think we're a body, it is necessary to remember that we are that. But he goes on to say, Endrum nam adu, endru enevidu ain. Why thinking that we are that? Why should we always be thinking that we are that? So, oh yeah, sorry, we have to change the order of words around here a little. That is the last clause, nam aduva nikum adanal. Since we always stand as that, why to be always thinking we are that? And then he asked, nan manidun enju enamo. Does one think I am a man? That is, we all know we are human. But in order to know we are human, do we get up in the morning and think, oh, I am a human being, I am a human being? And in order to, but I don't forget I'm a human being, do I have to go on thinking all day long, I am a human being, I'm not a donkey or a monkey, I'm a human being, I'm not a horse or a cow, I'm a human being? No, obviously not. Why don't we have to think I am a man or I am a human being? Because we know so clearly we are a man. Do I need to think I am Michael? I am not Narayan or Shiva or John or Mary or anyone else. I am Michael. Obviously, I don't. I know clearly I'm Michael. So once we've clearly understood what we are, what do we need to do? We need to investigate ourselves. And by investigating ourselves, we remain as we actually are. We stand as that. So the reason I went through all these verses is to emphasize the fact that what Bhagavan is talking about in verse 8 is not merely thinking, I am that, or soham. Though he uses the word soham and he uses the word bhavana, it is not meditating on the thought, he is I. What he means by bhavana apita is meditating on nothing other than I, meditating on what is not different. What is not different from ourselves is only ourselves. But thought who he is I is something different from ourselves. It comes and it goes. But before we learned Vedanta, we didn't know the truth, he is I. Now we know the truth, but much of the time we're forgetting it. We're going about our life as we are. So it's not merely a matter of thinking he is I. That's a mere thought, a mere idea. It's important to understand that he is I, but if we understand that he is I, how to experience him? We need to investigate I. That is the point. So I've talked a lot about this, but it's very important to clarify what Bhagavan is talking about in this verse. What he is talking about in this verse is self-investigation. What he describes here in Tamil as Ananya Bhava, meditating on what is not other, and here as Bhavana Apita, meditating, or that is non-separating meditation, meditation in which there are not two different things. In which there's no separation between the meditator and the meditation, what is meditated upon. That is the state of self-attentiveness. That is Atma-vichara. So that is what Bhagavan is talking about here. And that is why he says this is the best among all, because Atma-vichara, not only is it the most effective means to purify the mind, it is also the most it is also the only means to annihilate the root cause of the mind, namely ego. So the impurities in the mind are the Vishaya vasanas. When we hold on to I, when we attend to I alone, we are thereby not allowing ourselves to be swayed by any Vishaya vasanas, allowing our attention to move away from ourselves towards anything else, even to the thought, he is I, is allowing ourselves to be swayed by a Vishaya vasana. Holding on to I alone is being swayed by Sat vasana. And so by holding on to I, we are strengthening the Sat vasana, we are weakening the Vishaya vasana. So this is the most purifying, the most effective means to purify the mind. So it is anaitanamuttamam, it is the best among all. Then we come on to verse 9, and verse 9 draws out it points out how what Bhagavan talks about in verse 8 is a switch from doing to being. That is, so long as we are meditating on God as something other than ourselves, our attention is moving away from ourselves towards something else. That is a mental activity. When our attention turns back towards ourselves, the mind thereby subsides. So that is a cessation of mental activity. It is not a doing, but being. So that is what Bhagavan points out in this verse, in verse 9. What he says is, Bhava Sunya Sat, Bhava Sastatihi. That means standing firmly in Sat Bhava. Sat Bhava is the state of being. Bhava Sunya, which is devoid of meditation. Meditation here means mental activity, meditation in the sense of mental activity. So meditating on ourselves, though it is called meditation, it's unlike any other meditation. Because meditating on anything other than ourselves is a mental activity. Meditating on ourself alone is a cessation of mental activity. So it's bhava sunya, it is devoid of meditation, it's devoid of mental activity is what it means. So how to stand firmly in the state of being, he explains in the next clause, bhavana balat, because of strength of meditation, or literally balat means from the strength, or that means by or because of the strength of meditation. So we can be in the state of Satbhava only by the strength of meditation. What type of meditation will enable us to be in Satbhava? We need to understand this in the context of the previous verse. The bhavana that will enable us to be as we actually are is the bhavana apita, the non-separating meditation. In other words, meditation on I am alone. So by meditating on ourselves, the mind subsides, we remain in the state of being. So when he says by the strength of meditation, bhavana balat, what he means by strength is by the intensity and firmness and steadiness of our self-attentiveness. If we are steadily self-attentive, we are thereby giving no room for the rising of ego. Thereby we are being in our natural state. And that, what is the main point of this verse? Bhakti Uttama. That is the ultimate bhakti, the best bhakti. The Uttama means the best, foremost, highest, greatest, or ultimate. So the culmination, the pinnacle of bhakti is just being as we are by the strength of self-attentiveness. In the Tamil version, he begins with the words, Baba Balatinal, by the strength of meditation. Again, the Baba he's referring to there is what he referred to in the previous verse in Tamil as Ananya Baba, meditation on what is not other. What is meditation on what is not other? It's meditation only on ourselves, on I. So by the strength of that Ananya Baba, or that meditation on nothing other than I, Bhavanatita Satbhava Tirutale, being in Satbhava by the strength of being in Satbhava, which transcends meditation. How can we be in Satbhava? Only by the strength of Ananya Bhava, of self-attentiveness. So by the strength of self-attentiveness, being in Satbhava, which transcends all bhavana, all meditation in the sense of mental activity. In Tamil, he says, parabhakti tattvam. That is the truth or the reality or the principle of reality, I think is the best word, the reality or the true state of supreme devotion, parabhakti. Here in Sanskrit, he says bhakti uttama. They both imply the same. So the ultimate bhakti is just being as we actually are. And how can we be as we actually are? Only by the strength of self-attentiveness is the implication here. Merely by thinking I am he, we cannot remain as we are, because thinking I am he, our attention is going away from ourselves to the thought he is I. So that is, if so long as Soham is merely a thought, meditating on that thought is meditating on something other than ourselves. It's a mental activity. So it cannot lead to the state of just being. In order to remain firmly established in the state of just being, we need to attend to ourself alone. We need to attend to I alone, because only when we attend to I does the mind subside. And attending to I doesn't mean merely attending to the word I. It means attending to what that word I refers to, namely to ourselves. So being self-attentive is the means to be as we actually are. So to the extent to which we are self-attentive, to that extent are we being in Satbhava, are we standing firmly established in our natural state of just being. So that's why I said verse 8 is such an important verse, because verse 8 is the switch over. When we switch from the Anya Bhava to the Ananya Bhava, we are switching from mental activity to just being, because it's only by the strength of the Ananya Bhava, the self-attentiveness, that we can remain in Sat Bhava, in our natural state of just being as we actually are. And the same is emphasized by Bhagavan in verse 10. What he says in verse 10 is, Hritstale mana swastata kriya bhakti yoga bo das nischitam. What that means is, if we split it, Hritstale. Hritstale means in the heart place, or in the heart ground, we can take it, because the stala means here the ground from which we've risen as I. So in the heart ground, or in other words, in the ground from which we've risen, the source from which we've risen, which is the heart. The heart here obviously doesn't mean, as some people take it to mean, a place 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. That is only in a very outward-looking sense that that place in the body can be said to be the heart. Bhagavan explained why he said, for those who were looking for a place in the body, who couldn't think beyond the body, who were asking, where is the heart in the body? Then Bhagavan said it's 2 digits to right from the center of the chest, for a very simple reason. But when we refer to ourselves, that's where we point, because that is where now we feel we are spread throughout the body. We feel we are centered in that place in the 2 digits to right from the center of the chest, is somehow the center of our abode in this body. But that's obviously relative only to the body. Only so long as we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, does that have any meaning. So what Bhagavan means here by Hritstale is he's not talking about the place in the body. He's talking about the ultimate ground, the ultimate adhishtanam, the adhara, which is the true heart. That is the fundamental awareness I am, from which we have risen. In Tamil, he says, udita idatil, in the place of rising. So being in the place from which we've risen. the place from which we've risen is only that fundamental awareness I am, as I explained earlier. So that's what he refers to here as Hritstale, the heart, which is the ground, the source from which we've risen. So Hritstale, mana swastataha. That means manam is mind. Sva means what itself or oneself. Sta means standing. Ta means the state of standing. So the state of standing, sva, as we actually are. So the mind being as it actually is. What the mind actually is only the heart. That is only when we look outwards, we call it mind. When we look inwards, what previously seemed to be the mind is found to be the heart. Just like so long as you don't look at it carefully enough, the rope seems to be a snake. When you look at it carefully, you see the snake is nothing but a rope. Likewise, when the mind is turned within, Devaraja Mudli has recorded nicely in 2 places in Day by Day where Bhagavan said, the same mind, when facing outwards, is called mind or ego. When facing inwards, it is nothing but Atma Swarupa. It's nothing but our own real nature. So the mind standing in the heart, or the mind standing as itself, the mind being as it actually is, means the mind turning within and remaining just as it actually is, as that fundamental awareness I am. Where can you remain as the fundamental awareness I am? Only in the fundamental awareness I am. So the mind standing as itself means the mind standing as the heart in the heart, because that is, we can only be in the heart by being the heart. That is, these are just different, whether we describe it as abiding in ourself or by abiding as ourself, it means the same. It means being what we actually are. So, Hritstale mana swastata means the mind standing as itself in the ground, but is the heart, in its source, which is the heart. In Tamil, as I say, he says, Udita idatil odungi iratal, subsiding or merging and being in the heart, in the place from which we have risen. So that is the subject. And but what he is saying about that is nishchitam, certainly, kriya, bhakti, yoga, and bodha. Cha means and. So all these 4. Kriya means karma yoga or nishkarmiya karma here. It means bhakti means the path of bhakti. Yoga means the path of Raja Yoga, but Bhagavan will talk about in the next 5 verses, verses 11 to 15, which is the 5 verses we'll talk about next time. And bodha is means jnana, the path of jnana. So when he says that that the mind standing as itself in the heart ground is certainly kriya, bhakti, yoga, and bodha, what he implies is this is the culmination of all these paths. What is the aim of all these spiritual paths? What is the aim of karma yoga? What is the aim of bhakti yoga? What is the aim of raja yoga? What is the aim of jnana yoga? For us to know and to be what we actually are. Being what we actually are is the mind standing as itself, the mind standing as Atma Swarupa in Atma Swarupa, which is the heart, is the implication here. But this verse 10, Bhagavan is summarizing the whole of Upadesa Undiyar. That is the whole point of Upadesa Undiyar. Though he starts talking about karma, because those deluded so-called rishis in the Dharaka Varna, they were so enamored with action, and they believed that by their karmas, by their ritualistic action, by their Vedic karmas, they could achieve all they wanted to achieve. they believed in karma so strongly. So Bhagavan had to begin by saying, the fruit of karma is given only by God. That is, when you do an action, fruit the fruit of the action, the result of the action is out of your hands. It's in the hands of God, and God alone decides what fruit is appropriate for which action. So action action is jada. It does not give fruit of its own accord. It's only as gives the fruit, but God decides the appropriate fruit. So he begins by saying that. Then he says, but the cause of action is our Bishaya Vasanas. That is, so long as the seeds, he refers to them as Tamil, so long as the seeds are there, that is the outward going seeds, that causes us to fall in the ocean of action. Therefore, action does not give liberation. Action obstructs liberation. But by nishkarmiya karma done for the love of God, we can purify the mind. And that will lead us to the point where it leads us to the highest action, which is meditation. But the meditation, so long as we're meditating on God as something other than ourselves, that is an action. When instead of meditating upon God as something other than ourselves, we meditate on him as not other than ourselves, as I alone, our attention turns away from other things, away from the idea of God as something outside, back to the reality of God who is shining in our heart. Thereby the mind subsides and remains in the state of being. Being in that state of being, that is the culmination of all spiritual paths. It's the culmination of karma yoga, bhakti yoga, raja yoga, and jnana yoga. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. So that is the main part of the talk today, but I have been asked some questions.
Michael,
so shall I first deal with the questions Sorry?
Michael, we have 3 questions, 2 from Sindhuji, 1 from Neera Kashyapji.
Okay.
Now, I'm just wondering if you can quickly skim through the questions. Would you like to take them now or in the next session, given the sensitivity towards the time that we have already?
Okay. How much time can you give me for answering the questions?
10 minutes.
Okay, but I'll try and answer them quickly. Shall I first start with Sindhu's questions?
Absolutely, please.
Yeah, okay. His first question was, in the last satsang, Michael mentioned about Manolaya and Manonasa. How is one to differentiate between the two, and how is one to avoid Manolaya? The difference between the two, we will talk about this in more detail next time, because Bhagavan deals with this subject in verse 13. But the simple difference between Manolaya and Manonasa is that we come out of Manolaya, we never come out of Manonasa. So if your mind has dissolved and you've come out of it again, then you know that dissolution was not Manonasa, it was only Manolaya. So any state of dissolution of mind from which we come out again is Manolaya. So sleep is Manolaya. So your question is how to avoid Manolaya? Well, obviously we can't avoid Manolaya entirely. We need to sleep every day, because when we rise as ego, and we're constantly going outwards, that requires a lot of energy. We become tired. So we subside in sleep because of tiredness. So there's no wrong in sleeping. We can't sleep more than we require. If you're feeling tired, it's good to sleep. Sleep well, wake up with a fresh mind, and then turn your mind back within to investigate who am I. So we shouldn't try to avoid sleep. But what we should try to avoid is artificially brought about states of Manolaya, such as Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Because by means of Raja Yoga, which is the subject we'll be talking about next time, it is possible to bring about states called Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which is just another state of Manolaya. The difference between sleep and Manolaya is sleep, we fall asleep because of tiredness. The difference between sleep and Nirvikalpa Samadhi is we fall asleep because of tiredness. We subside in Nirvikalpa Samadhi because of pranayama and other exercises. To the yogi, there may seem to be a difference between Nirvikalpa Samadhi and sleep. The reason there seems to be a difference is because we fall asleep because of tiredness. So we often don't recognize that we are aware in sleep. Whereas because the yogi brings about the Nirvikalpa Samadhi as a result of deliberately chitta-vritti narodaha, suppressing the outward-going vrittis of the mind by means of pranayama and other exercises, they are able to recognize that the awareness continues in that sleep. But they so long as they think that Nirvikalpa Samadhi is different to sleep, they have still failed to understand that the awareness that they experience in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, exactly the same awareness is there even in sleep. So we don't need to experience Nirvikalpa Samadhi. We just need a little bit of viveka. We need to think a little carefully about it, and it should be obvious to us. But though we are not aware of anything else in sleep, we are clearly aware I am. So there's actually no difference at all between sleep and Nirvikalpa Samadhi. They are both just temporary states of dissolution of mind. In fact, there cannot be any difference between one state of dissolution and another state of dissolution, because all differences exist only in the mind. So in the state where the mind is dissolved, there cannot be any difference. The only difference is from the perspective of the waking state. Mano nasa is a state from which we never come out. From the perspective of the mind in waking or dream, we seem to have come out of Manolaya. So Manolaya seems to be a defective state because we come out of it. That's the only difference. But that difference is not a difference in the state of Manolaya or Manonasa. In that state, there's no differences at all. It's when we come out of Manolaya, we then say there's a difference. Oh, I've come out of this state, therefore it was temporary. We will never come out of NASA, so we'll never again think it was temporary. So I hope that, but I can answer it. If you like to ask this question again next time, we can go into this subject more deeply next time. The next question Sindhu asked is, while practicing self-abidance, I observe that I feel that emotionally I am not moved. I am more relaxed, but my thinking process is going on continuously. Is it fine? Self-abidance means being as we actually are. When we remain as we actually are, what we actually are is just pure awareness. So pure awareness means awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. So long as we're aware of ourselves as anything other than ourselves, we are not in a state of perfect self-abidance. We may be, that is to the extent to which we attend to ourselves and thereby withdraw our attention to other things, we are thereby being as we actually are. If we attend to ourselves, if we turn our entire attention back to ourselves, so we are not aware of anything other than ourselves, that is the state of being as we actually are. That is the state of pure awareness. But most of us don't have sufficient love to turn our attention within so keenly, so deeply. So though we are attending to ourselves, we haven't totally withdrawn our attention from other things. So we are still aware maybe of thoughts and other things to some extent. So that is not a state of perfect self-abidance. That's a state of partial self-attentiveness. Partial self-attentiveness means partial self-abidance. So to some extent, we are being as we actually are, but we haven't completely let go of other things. So whatever we may feel, whatever we may be aware of, when we are trying to be self-attentive, we should ignore it. We should try to attend only to ourselves. So whatever we may feel, whatever may appear or disappear, to whom does it appear? We need to turn our attention more and more keenly back towards ourselves. So we need to ignore whatever we may feel, whether we're emotionally moved or not moved, whether we're relaxed, whether thinking is going on or not going. Let thinking go on. We shouldn't be aware of it. We should ignore it. If we ignore it, then obviously it won't go on. So the very fact that we're aware of any of these things, we're aware that we are emotionally moved or not emotionally moved. We're aware that we're relaxed or not relaxed. We're aware that we're thinking or not thinking. These are all being aware of things other than I am. What we need to be aware of is only I am. So we need to try to turn our attention more and more towards ourselves. So we won't immediately be able to do so, but that doesn't mean it's fine to be aware of these things. Yes, we will be aware of these things inevitably. Until we turn our attention back towards ourselves keenly enough, we will continue to be aware of the body, the mind, all these things. But we are trying to turn our attention back to ourselves and thereby ignore these things. We shouldn't be trying to ignore these things, because if we're trying to ignore them, we're thinking about them. How can I ignore this thought? I'm thinking about the thought. We need to attend to ourselves and thereby ignore them. When the more we attend to ourselves, the more our attention will be withdrawn from all other things. So the more they will recede into the background of our awareness. And is there time to just quickly answer the one other question you said? I don't know what that question is.
Question was from Meera Kashyapji. Should I read the question out?
Oh, yes, I see. Yes, I see. Okay. You've written that here also. Yes. Bhagavan has often said that meditation is sticking to one thought, be it a mantra or japa. If this is meditation as a mental activity, can this transition to the I am bhava? Yes, that is, we are sticking to any one thought is meditation, yes. But so long as that thought is a thought about anything other than ourselves, it is still anya bhava. It's still meditating on something other than ourselves. But when we go deeper in this practice, we will come to understand, generally when we meditate, we are trying to, that is the best meditation, is to meditate on God, rather than meditating on anything other than God. What is better than meditating on God? So the best meditation Bhagavan is talking about is meditation on God. Of course, we can meditate on other thoughts, but better than meditating on other thoughts, it's best to meditate on God with love. But rather than taking God to be something other than ourselves, when our mind is purified, we will understand, so long as we think of God as something other than ourselves, that is merely a thought. So by meditating on the thought of God as something other than ourselves, we're meditating on a thought. So we're not meditating on God himself. What God actually is that which is shining in our heart as I. So when we come to understand that God is not something other than ourselves, God is not, whatever we may conceive God to be, is a limitation, because we can only conceive limited things. We cannot conceive unlimited. So to know God as he actually is, we need to attend to him as he actually is. As he actually is as I am. That is, Bhagavan often said, the natural name of God, the natural name of all of us, the first name of God, the first name for all of us is I am. So meditating on I am is the best of all. Meditating on I am doesn't mean just meditating on the words I am, but meditating on what the words I am refer to. That is to ourselves, to our own fundamental awareness. So with the understanding that God is not something other than ourselves, but God is that which is shining in our heart as I, we need to turn our attention back towards I. That is transitioning from the Anya Bhava to the Ananya Bhava, from the meditation on God as something other than ourselves to meditating on ourselves. So our aim is That is, for those who mind are still outward going, who are still not willing to accept, for God is that which is shining in their heart as I. Yes, it's good to meditate on a name or form of God, which is a thought, but that meditating on that name or form of God is a means of purifying the mind. When the mind is purified, we will come to understand that God is not limited to any name or form. God, but the true Swarupa of God, Kadaval Swarupa or Ishvara Swarupa is Atma Swarupa. He is I, Soham. So he is that which is shining in our heart as I. So we should turn our attention back within to attend to I am alone. I hope this adequately answers that question. So this is how we transition from mental activity to just being. So long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, even to a thought of God, even to a name or form of God, that is still a mental activity. When we turn our attention back towards ourselves to attend to I am alone, that is the cessation of mental activity and the subsidence in our natural state of just being. Sat Baba, just being in Sat Baba.
Thank you, Michael.
I hope this adequately answers that question.
Yes,
Om
please.
Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.
Michael, thank you so much for another wonderful session on Upadesa Saram. We shall reconvene with you next month. For the devotees, a very quick announcement that we will have Raghavji with us at the Delhi Raman Kendra physically between 25th, 26th, and 27th, and we could meet him during certain short satsangs that will be organized at the Kendra shrine. Of course, more details will be sent out in due course of time. Michael, thank you so much.
Thanks to Bhagavan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Narayanji, can I please request you to initiate Akshar?
Tarunarunamani Kirinavali Nigartarum Aksharamana Madhumalai Tirunadiya Tiru Adiyar Tirumaral Tiriya Paravudal Purulaga Karunagaramuni Ramanari Enuva Gayinal Soliyadu Gariyaga அருணாச்சலம் என அகமே அறிவோடும் ஆழ்வார் சிவனுலகு ஆழ்வாரே அருணாச்சலவர்க்கேற்ற அக்ஷரமண மாலை சாற்ற கருணாகர கணபதியே கரம் அருளி காப்பாயே அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் என அகமே நினைப்பவர் அகந்தை வேறறுப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா அழகு சுந்தரம் போல் அகமும் நீயும் முற்று அபிநமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அகம்புகுந்தீர்த்துன் அககுகை சிறையாய் அமர்வித்ததென்கொல் அருணாச்சலா ஆறு காயனை ஆண்டனை அகற்றி திலம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா இப்பழித்த உனை நினைப்பித்தார் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈன்றிடும் அன்னையின் பெரிதருள் புரிவோம் இதுவோ உனதருள் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல உன்னையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுள்ளத்தின் மேல் உறுதி இருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா ஊர் சுற்று ஊலம் விடாது உன்னை கண்டு உன்னழகை காட்டருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா என்னை அழித்திற் போல் என்னை களவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா ஏன் இந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறர் இழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஐம்புல கள்வர் அகத்தினில் புகும்போது அகத்தில் நீ இலையோ அருணாச்சலா ஒருவன் முன்னை பொழித்தவர் வருவார் புன்சோதே இது அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஓங்கார பொருள் உப்புயர்வில்லை உனையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா அவ்வை போல எனக்குன் அருளை தந்து என்னை ஆழ்வது உன் கடன் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமாலை வாழி வாழ்க சுயம் பிரகாசம் வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சுத்தாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே வாழ்க சுயம் பிரகாசம் வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சுத்தாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே ஏழுலங்கன் ஜீவன் முக்தி இன்பம் பொங்கவே ஏழுலங்கன் ஜீவன் முக்தி இன்பம் பொங்கவே இதயமாகும் இறைவனாகி எல்லாம் ஓங்கவே இதயமாகும் இறைவனாகி எல்லாம் ஓங்கவே பாழ்மனம் அகந்தை வாழ்வு பாழ் புட்டொழிகவே பாழ்மனம் அகந்தை வாழ்வு பாழ் புட்டொழிகவே பரமசச்சிதானந்தாத்ம பால் பொழிகவே பரமசச்சிதானந்தாத்ம பால் பொழிகவே வாழ்க சுயம் பிரகாசம் வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சுத்தாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே தட்டிலாத நித்திய ஜீவம் தத்துவமோங்கவே தட்டிலாத நித்திய ஜீவம் தத்துவமோங்கவே தன்மயத்தி சின்மயந்தழைத்தி ஓங்கவே தன்மயத்தி சின்மயந்தழை ஓங்கவே எட்டு திக்கும் அம்ச சோகம் எதிரொலிக்கவே எட்டு திக்கும் அம்ச சோகம் எதிரொலிக்கவே எல்லாம் பிரம்மம் என்னும் உண்மை இறைவகிக்கவே எல்லாம் பிரம்மம் என்னும் உண்மை இறைவகிக்கவே வாழ்க சுயம் பிரகாசம் வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சுத்தாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே சசோகம் சசோகம் துவேலாமம் சசோகம் ஓம் பூர்புவஸ்வः தத்சவிதுர்வரெண்யம் भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देव सवित प्रसव सत्यम दर्शन प्रसंजामी हम स्वामी स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा ओम अपाने स्वाहा ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा ओम उदानाय स्वाहा ओम समानाय स्वाहा ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा नमो भगवती श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवती श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवती श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवती श्री शिव पार्वती नमः नमो भगवती श्री शिव पार्वती नमः नमो भगवती श्री शिव पार्वती नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः कुलगंड गोसीरम नैवेद्यम समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयम समर्पयामि अमृतोक्तं सूत्राभूषं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि यों पूगीवरसमाहितं नागवल्लीतलयुतं कर्पूर्णसूर्णसमिष्टं प्रतिगृतां कर्पूरनीराजनं श्रीरमणमहर्षिः समर्पयामि ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः कात्याय नमः मुरुगाय नमः वल्ली देवाय नमः सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः स्वामिनाथाय नमः दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः रत्नाकरे नमः भैरवरे नमः नंदीमहेश्वराय नमः शिवपार्वतीये नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः ओमो वा वेदस्य राजमागस्ते यो राजासन् राजो वा सौम्येने जले देवस्वामिनानि यमसी भवन्ति एतावन्तो वै देवानां स्वाहा स एवास्मै स्वां कैतन्ति स एनं मनस्तवन्ते राजाय देवसुराजा भवति न तत्र सूर्योपाधिजन्तकारकं हेमादित्युदवादि कुर्वदग्नि तमेवानुर्वादि सर्वं दस्यवादा सर्वमिदं विभाति कर्पूरनीराजनं श्रीरमणमहर्षिः समर्पयामि कर्पूरनेत्रं मृगावली देवानि समर्पयामि कर्पूरनेत्रं श्रीमद्शिवपार्वतीः समर्पयामि योवान् पुष्पं वेद पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पशुमान् भवति चंद्रमा भावां पुष्पं पुष्पं पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पशुमान् भवति ओम तद्ब्रह्मा ओम तद्वायु ओम तदात्मा ओम तत्सत्यम ओम तत्सर्वम ओम तत्पुरो नमः अंधचर्ति भूतेश गुहायां विश्वमूर्तिषु त्वं यज्ञस्तं वसत्कारस्तं इन्द्रस्तं रुद्रस्तं विष्णुस्तं ब्रह्मस्तं प्रजापति ओम तदा भो ज्योतिरुदं मृदं ब्रह्मपुरुषुरं न कर्मणा न प्रजयादने नित्यानैके अमृतत्वमानसु परेण नाहं नीतं गुहायं विभ्राजते दत्यधियो विसन्ति वेदांत विज्ञान से नित्यदार्था संन्यास योगा तदय शुद्ध सत्वाः ते ब्रह्मलोके तु परांत काले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे तारं विभावं परमेश्वभूतं यत्पुण्डरीकं पुरमत्य सगुं सदं तत्राभित्तक्रमकगनं विशोगस् तस्मिन् यदन्तदसुभासित्यं यो वेदान्तो स्वरप्रोक्तो वेदान्तस्य च प्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परसमहेश्वरः मंत्रपुष्पं रमणमहर्षिक्यं मंत्रपुष्पं कार्तिकाय मुरुगावल्लीदेवानक्यं मंत्रपुष्पं सुब्रह्मण्यंकं मंत्रपुष्पं स्वामिनाथनकं मंत्रपुष्पं दक्षिणामूर्तिक्यं मंत्रपुष्पं नटराजर्कं मंत्रपुष्पं श्री भैरवर्कं मंत्रपुष्पं नंदीमहेश्वरार्कं मंत्रपुष्पं श्रीमन् शिवपार्वतीक्यं समर्पयामि ओम तत्सत्कृपार्पणमस्तु हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम यानि यानि सत्पापानि जन्मान्तरकृतानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the
रमणाय नमः रमणाय कार्तिकाय मुर्गा बलिदेव सुब्रमण्याय स्वामीनाथाय दक्षिणामूर्ति नटराज भैरव नंदी महेश्वराय शिव पार्वती ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम अरुणाचल रमणाय ओम रमणाय ओम रमणाय हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम।
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the closure of today's satsang with Mr. Michael James. We shall reconvene next Sunday at the same time. Namo Ramana.